age? Do we just apply anti-wrinkle cream? Or do we combat ways to prolong our lives from the get-go? Things like no smoking, no drinking, stepping into the fountain of youth, and wishful thinking are all on our side. So what exactly makes a game age well? Whether it's how well the game design still holds up to this day, or even the graphics to an extent of looking like they have a few wrinkles but still pretty fresh, it's the games that can fall under this category and still remain classics that people can play today and still get a kick out of in the way that the game's knees haven't given up yet, and they haven't slipped a disc, considering they might not be cartridges that we're talking about. The controls themselves remain familiar to this current day, as well as the visuals presenting something ahead of their time. And through generations to come, we will definitely have our kids and grandkids able to idolize the charms that the games have recollected down the road. So, without further ado, here is the top 10 video games which, from my perspective, have aged exceptionally well. Broadcasted straight from my bedroom. Dig! Sonic the Hedgehog has had a fair bit to live up to in following the first game's hype, and boy, did it deliver. The spin dash was now built for going at top speeds and not just using whilst you're already running. And this one is probably the most debatable out of the list because a lot of people will say that Sonic 2 has aged better, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles to me has a lot of new quirks that still make it quite relevant. The level design to me, I'd say, is the most solid out of the three games and looks the most refined in terms of all the new quirks, as I mentioned, the game lets you pull off. I mean, this is where a lot of the more variety was brought to Sonic and worked well in its favor. Saving was something that really helped the franchise innovate so that the barrel of demise couldn't make you start the game all over again, wondering why a mechanic like that was even introduced.
Because you can look it up somewhere.
Yeah, and as a result we got Armor Chow, shouldn't we be lucky? But personally, it's the game that has the most replayability for me and keeps you coming back with arguably the best soundtrack to grace the classic games, as Michael Jackson himself helped compose it. No! Okay, so we're gonna have to get a bit cruel here, sorry. I meant for this to be a friendly video and now I feel so bad. And while I can safely call Silent Hill 2 my favorite game in the franchise, without a doubt is my vision of the third game looking as sharply grotesque as I remember it years ago. The second game did capture a lot of the symbolism down to a bone-crunching mark with some of the most disturbing monsters to grace the video game industry. But Silent Hill 3 had a lot to live up to in terms of carrying on from the first game, which gives you two worlds to embrace your demise in. And that's without watching the live-action movie. The less we say about that, the better. We don't want to give them more publicity. Even if it is bad publicity, which doesn't actually exist, and I'm actually still talking about it, I should probably stop. I would consider this one of the best looking games on the PS2. And it's a shame that it really is that version you can get the full experience on, which wouldn't have been the case if not for Konami's safekeeping of the Master Disc. But with Silent Hill 3 throwing an entire can of worms at you right from the get-go, it's clear that they wanted to go back to the more hellish and brutal feel of the Silent Hill series with its radical sound effects to rain upon you. And this is one of those few games where the lip syncing tries to be nailed down to the bone. And considering the fact that the original Silent Hill series had monsters with so much more creativity than what we have today, then you can assume that the novelty just doesn't wear off anytime soon. Oith! Exploration took a new turn, combining top-notch action with the birth of Super Metroid. And thus, it became a marvel within the industry. I thought I'd use some other word other than icon to sound fancy. Unlike its predecessors, which, while still classics in their own right, I don't think have aged as well as this game, Super Metroid in this regard brought a new sense of atmospheric exploration that more than certainly still holds up to this day. The music itself is extremely chilling, the rush and the suspense combined with creating something with a new twist each time as you progress on, and backtrack when that idea was still pretty fresh. The color scheme's presenting a sense of either isolation, dread, etc., and each time you advance through the game, you see that claustrophobia outshining many horror games we've come to experience today. As it's said that the creator himself said that the game is partly based on the movie Aliens, which in itself is a sheer classic, so the two go hand in hand. And considering how smooth the game runs, it's pretty evident in knowing how this game expressed itself as an art form that only it can understand. God, I miss doing lists like this. Scythe! Do you want a tactical way of getting through your game? Resident Evil 4 has you covered for that. Once again, Silent Hill and Resident Evil are on a list together, I get it. They're just like two peas in a pot. They once had that sparkle in their eye, but now there's just a glimmer of odd days to be seen. Now, while I can say that the classic Resident Evil titles and the first Silent Hill game have aged quite a bit now along with their PS1 buddies, well, most of them anyways, Resident Evil 4 was just kicking back and relaxing whilst it refined the gameplay to share both the suspense of the classic series, as well as a new kind of challenge that would be the pinnacle of the modern day survival horror. The tone and pacing of the game is some of the best I've seen in the gaming industry, with some great weapons and upgrades to go along with it. The whole stranded island setting provides it with that no escape rule. Leon may still have had all the gadgets necessary, but he was also on his own fighting a horde of many different, powerful to an extent enemies. The game changed the way we see Resident Evil forever, combining a new shred of steady action and tense moments, and still harboring the classic feel the games had. But I'd like to think of it as a welcome change. Quick! This is where we throw all the wonderful elements of story at you, in order to cooperate with the levels of technicality that turn-based battle systems can provide. So, why exactly should I combine both Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI? Well, compared to the later games in the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy VI doesn't really have much holding it back. You could argue that 7's gameplay choices could leave you in an unfair pickle at times when you leave the battle area only to find out that all your points are gone because you didn't pay attention. One chance to read. Plus, it doesn't help that it resembles Lego, unlike its two sequels, with one game harboring a complicated battling system and the other actually aging just fine for a PS1 title. 6 comes with this generation which gets dipped in fine wine, and then served to Bill Gates. Chrono Trigger, with its well-defined sprites and great active time battling system, makes it a great example of an RPG getting the turn-based concept down to the bare bones of what makes a well-creative and balanced style all the more fun. That, combined with the epic storytelling of both games, makes them unforgettable gems through the eyes of the many. So with the upcoming release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake as well as 15, we can still carry the series on, and also tease a top 10 best Final Fantasy VII or general Final Fantasy moments if that seems like a good idea to people.
Pimp! All aircraft break away!
Star Fox, or Star Wing I personally should be saying, may have appeared as revolutionary back in the day with its 3D outlook on a fight to save the galaxy from an aeroplane. It was Star Fox 64 that, or Lilac Wars, that rendered the blocky textures and slowish pacing a bit run down by today's standards. With the level of variety in the game as well as the fact that it's an N64 game which can be paired with the PS1 to have a lot of reverse anti-wrinkle cream games, the game would highlight just how well it can run and include a lot more character depth within its wake, making the retracted aiming system actually acceptable by today's standards compared to games such as GoldenEye. Not to say that game is bad as well, you know, because it's a cherished game to me, just like the SNES Star Wing. It just doesn't hold up too well in the modern world, as the Landmaster would definitely agree. And that's exactly why Star Fox 64 gets the lifelong pass here.
I guess I should be thankful.
Yes, Farco, yes you should. See? He has good manners. Manners! Help yourself if you can! Jeez. Pedwar! Cel-shaded graphics aren't exactly like hairstyles where the 90s no shampoo look was made redundant next to the KB blonde hair with big bushy brown eyebrows, no. Well, the shadings can either be a make or break situation. Wind Waker as a game holds up for that very reason. Oh, and gameplay? Well, despite whatever people wanted to ramble on about back then when Link being too kid-friendly and not your typical elven Brock Lesnar, this change of style served as a nice gesture to the series, allowing the player to explore the world in a different way. The sailing aspect was just as relaxing as it could be, and the HD remaster shows how sharp the game can look by today's standards. And considering the cel shading in itself, it actually makes the game feel all the more cinematic as you go through it, fight bosses, and bring the world down to cinders, making the world itself feel a lot more mystical through its wake as you sail the high seas. This further inspired Toon Link to be in Super Smash Bros. Maybe we'll make videos about that sometime. And just coming up with its own direct sense of innovation. A solid script in my books. 3!
I'm ready.
The fighting game genre can either be the yin or yang of an equation that can either succeed or suffer based on the aspects of balance. Street Fighter is one franchise that welds this into titanium. That just makes it my personal favorite fighting game franchise, being the one that has both a good visual and physical feel. Street Fighter 2 comes very close and can be considered a game or games that has or have aged dramatically well. But carrying the series forward leaves a lot more for the third installment to explore, and coincidentally, Third Strike is where it all blossoms. The smoothest animation in retro times where the influence for the fourth game would stem all of it from the art of all the movesets and backdrops takes it in. And this is something that the old Mortal Kombat can't really live up to as well, as in the way that Street Fighter lives up to the current games it has on the register. Die! If you're looking for a storybook to become a virtual reimagination, this is it right here. While many people would argue that the first Super Mario World is the one that defines aging well, personally I think that in my own right, Yoshi's Island still exhales a colourful and playful aura to it. The first installment put everything into one bag, to have someone blow it up and burst out a great flow of weird antics, like suggestive plants that got past customs somehow. They're on vacation on the island, basically. Also a friendly junkyard dog. How does that happen? And a boss which involves pushing a flower pot over. Yes, it's that simple. The game may have had an annoying kid to look after, but the gameplay itself is as solid as all can be, with the final boss to completely change the stakes and add to the detail that already encountered. A sight to behold, even to this day.
Sonan redevis.
Now, the only way I can explain as to why these games were included in the list is just because, subjectively, I think the other games have aged better. But you have a say in it as well, so I won't stop you. Carry on your merrily way. Anyway, here's the honorable mentions. Cell shading and tight gameplay. Animations still feel fresh. A lot of action for an NES game. Good pacing and animations. Tremendous platforming and design. Quirky and cartoony. And textures still look crisp. Here it is again, with its unique concept that no one has been able to replicate to this day. Will they ever? And will The Last Guardian be something that still lets it hold up or overwrites its save file? Oh, I highly doubt it. You look at many landscapes displayed behind video games these days, and you think that Shadow of the Colossus is in the same field as them. When you ride an oversized horse across barren plains to get to a boss, you're left to soak all of it in. And when the anticipated fight arrives, you're left in awe at the sheer scale the game delivers onto you, whilst the man versus beast process amplifies beyond the heavens. If Phalanx secretly lets you defy gravity on his back, that is. It's difficult to replicate a game as massive as this, and many of you who have seen my unused Colossi video will know that many more ideas could have been thrown into the mix. However, due to mixed reasons, that wasn't the case. But the game gave us enough to sink our teeth into anyway, so not much of a loss there, considering many of those unused Colossi were either broken or too powerful. Yeah, Wanda isn't the most action-packed person to control, but it's his sheer determination that we control, and live through the tragedies that the games bestow upon us. So, that concludes my list. There are a lot of games I wanted to include, but I only had room for 10, so let me know what appeals to you to this day, and until next time, be sure to like and subscribe if you did in fact take a liking to this video, subscribe to other channels listed below, and follow me on social media for any updates and other discussion-based stuff. Thank you, and until next time, lights out.